Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Born Again Again podcast. Today we're going to be talking about indoctrination and being raised in a Christian home and some ways that we found to recover from that. But before we jump in, I just wanted to make a quick mention of our Patreon account, which is under the name Born Again Again, and our Facebook group, which has been amazing lately. Tons of awesome discussions on there and great people, as well as our Instagram account. Go check those out if you haven't already. So let's start out first with a definition of what indoctrination is.
Okay, let's look it up.
Webster's dictionary defines indoctrination as...
Google says that indoctrination means the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. And I think, as far as we know, it's usually with regards to religion.
Or like cults and stuff,
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Although I was reading today about it, and it was talking about, in Soviet Russia, I guess those kids were brought up indoctrinated as well. And I mean, I guess we were too in different ways, brought up thinking that America was the best country in the world and just unwaveringly questioning that.
Yeah, I feel
not questioning that.
The thing that we found is that it can mean just you believe anything that your parents tell you because you're, as we'll find out as a child, your mind is so malleable and ideas can get sucked in and then they stay and they form firm thoughts until you're an adult.
Yeah.
So the first time we kind of heard about this, I think, was probably from Reddit or just our atheist reading. And
right. When we first started reading about leaving Christianity and stuff, people were talking about indoctrination all the time.
They kept saying it on indoctrination.
They're so mad about it.
Yes, indoctrination.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah.
What does this mean? And kind of looking it up and hearing people's stories where we started to ask, were we indoctrinated?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Does that mean that we were indoctrinated? And that added a lot to just our journey of leaving our faith, because once you start to think, as a child, of course I'm going to believe what my parents are telling me. You start to kind of think, well, I'm going to believe anything that these people who I super trust tell me. So how do I know which part of that was true and which part of that was false? So I think that really was another, I don't know, it gave us another reason to look into why we believed what we believed, because we're we can't just take this on faith because we were obviously, in a sense, brainwashed.
Yeah.
And I feel we've mentioned this before, and we mentioned it on our interview for the Life After podcast, which if you haven't listened to it, go check that out. But that we had a moment when we were sitting with an elder and his wife of our church, and she mentioned that her daughter believed them to be brainwashed. And that was the first time I had ever considered, am I brainwashed? And I think that brainwashing and indoctrination can go a little bit hand in hand.
Yeah.
They have really similar meanings,
and I think
not
on
the
this
same.
episode we'll probably use the two terms interchangeably, because that's essentially what it is. I think another piece of when we realized what indoctrination was and we started reading about it and learning more about it, it really helped me to understand why I had such a hard time separating my own beliefs and my own thoughts and opinions about things versus what I just grew up believing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As I became a 25-year-old Christian, it's almost impossible at that point to separate what did I choose to believe and what do I just believe because I was in an environment that caused me to believe that way, whether it be from my parents or Sunday school teachers or whatever. But yeah, it was really interesting reading today about the different ways that kids' brains work, or I guess the ways that little kids' brains operate and how differently it is from the way our brains operate now that we're grown up. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with just who children can trust. And I was learning that from the age of 4, I guess, sometimes younger, sometimes older, but kids actually start to be able to determine for themselves who's trustworthy and who's not trustworthy, which is really interesting. And it's just the first critical thinking stuff that's beginning to form in their brains. But in general, kids trust their parents more than anyone else. And I think that's obvious for a lot of us. Our parents are generally trying to steer us right. And on top of that, a lot of the things that our parents do tell us are accurate, your parents tell you, don't touch the stove, it's hot. and you go and touch the stove and it's hot and you burn yourself and you learn, oh, my parent was right. Mom was right. She's trustworthy. Or like, be careful running on the ice. You'll slip and fall, and you run out and you slip and fall on the ice and you're like, well, mom was right. So basically, your whole childhood, hopefully you're building a trust of your parents' authority and like your parents' wisdom about the world. Right. So by the time you're old enough to start learning about religion, you trust them completely.
Yeah, well, I think as a child, you are, in some ways, you're in survival mode. So you're have a very primitive state of mind. And so you're just like, you're looking to someone to keep you safe. And so if this person keeps you safe, then you trust and do what they say.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something like we hadn't considered, coming out of this. Like you said, it was hard to separate what you actually believed on your own and what you believed because you grew up with it. It's like, I don't know, just as we've been reading more about the brain and how it works, we've been realizing that like a lot of these thoughts have affected us for so long because they're deeply lodged in our subconscious mind.
Yeah, that was the other part of it. Because like, obviously our parents are going to try to teach us and guide us to what's right when we're little. But I think the thing that was so interesting to me is that those messages we received when we were like younger than 8 years old had a lot more impact than the same message would have if I would have received it when I was 15 or when I was 20. That like it goes straight into your subconscious mind almost.
Yeah.
And you were reading a bit about like why that is, right?
Yeah. And so last week we were talking about brainwaves a lot, and I read a part of that book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And I wanted to read a little bit more about brainwaves, but this time with regards to just growing up and what kind of brainwaves your brain is at different ages in your life. And
the brainwaves, just to recap, we're talking about like our thoughts, depending on what the thought is like and depending on the state of the person, the emotions and the level of consciousness and all of that, your brain like operates at a different electrical frequency, right? That's kind of what it is. Delta being super deep sleep all the way up to like a really high energy state.
Yeah. And so last week we talked about delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And so in that order, that's kind of like, that's the order we talked about it last week. And that's kind of the order that your brain goes like as you grow up. You like kind of progress into that beta state where beta can be like high anxiety.
So you start out at the
delta.
lowest.
At delta.
Okay.
So at delta, it says, between birth and 2 years old, the human brain functions primarily in the lowest brain wave levels. This range of electromagnetic activity is known as delta waves. Adults in deep sleep are in delta. This explains why a newborn usually can't remain awake for more than a few minutes at a time, and why even with their eyes open, young babies can be asleep. That's creepy.
Yeah, it is.
When 1-year-olds are awake, they're still primarily in delta because they function principally from their subconscious. Information from the outside world enters their brains with little editing, critical thinking, or judgment taking place. The thinking brain, the neocortex or conscious mind, is operating at very low levels at this point. So I thought it was interesting when we were reading this part that it says that information enters the brain with little editing or critical thinking. And going along with what we were reading about indoctrination, it's like getting someone to accept a belief with like uncritically.
Without any kind of questioning.
And that's like, I think that's the time, like, that when you like are getting someone as a child and you're giving them information, like that's the best time for them to be learning.
Yeah.
And I think that like a lot of people, they know that, but I don't think that they understand like how deeply that's true.
Right. Like the things that you communicate to them are like lifelong messages that are getting embedded deep in their subconscious. It's not like just a surface level message.
Okay, so next let's look from ages 2 to 5. So a child in this age range begins to demonstrate slightly higher EEG patterns. These theta wave frequencies measure 4 to 8 cycles per second. Children functioning in theta tend to be trance-like and primarily connected to their internal world.
Oh yeah, so kids are like amazing at imagination and like visualizing things in the real life. I remember reading something else
Yeah, exactly. Like this is saying that right now. It says they live in the abstract and in the realm of imagination and exhibit few of the nuances of critical rational thinking. Thus, young children are likely to accept what you tell them. P.S. Santa is real. or in our case,
yes,
God is real.
Yeah.
The devil is real. At this stage, phrases such as the following have huge impact. Big boys don't cry. Girls should be seen and not heard. Your sister is smarter than you. If you get cold, you'll catch cold. These types of statements go straight to the subconscious mind because these slow brainwave states are the realm of the subconscious.
Dang, that's so interesting. I was just reading another thing today about hypnosis and like hypnotherapy. And when a hypnotherapist puts you in like a trance, the whole purpose of that is so that they can give you messages that go hopefully straight to your subconscious. So if you're trying to unlearn how to be
without filtering,
Right,
and you're
no
not like
filter.
judging them or being critical of what the
Exactly.
thoughts are.
Yeah, you're almost like half asleep. You're in like a trance state. Those trance states, I guess, that is like between theta and delta in an adult who's in a hypnotherapy session. And so that is the perfect like prime state for messages to be imprinted straight into the subconscious mind.
Okay, wow.
Which is really interesting because you're saying from 2 to 5. And I think I was reading something where it was like up to 8 years old, kids operate in theta as well. But like that whole time from when they're born until the time they're 8, you can think of them in like sort of a therapeutic, hypnotic trance in one sense.
They're sponges.
They're sponges, yeah. So the messages that they receive at those ages, the messages we received when we were that age, go straight into our subconscious and they kind of form the way that we see the world. So yeah, we're just like not developed enough to have any kind of critical thought or any kind of filter for ourselves because we don't know what's going on. We're fresh little babies.
Yeah, we're kids.
Right.
Okay. And so I think I'm just going to read about one more brain frequency, and that's alpha. And it says between ages 5 and 8, brain waves change again to an alpha frequency. The analytical mind begins to form at this point in childhood development. Children start to interpret and draw conclusions about the laws of external life. At the same time, the inner world of imagination tends to be as real as the outer world of reality. Children in this age group typically have a foot in both worlds. That's why they pretend so well. For instance, you may ask a child to pretend that he is a dolphin in the sea, a snowflake in the wind, or a superhero coming to the rescue, and hours later, he is still in character. Ask an adult to do the same, and, well, you already know the answer. Okay, I feel like we are going to be primarily talking about the delta and the theta stages, as a really young child. I think it's interesting that we just read in alpha that children have both, like have a foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
And I feel like I hear this like really, it's really common to hear kids about the age, like that it's said about alpha, that they're starting to question like their religious upbringing.
Yeah, even like seeing our little nieces have questions about the world and stuff, you can tell they're like coming online.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I think like that's super interesting.
This science stuff is cool and super interesting to me, but I think what's most interesting is how directly it correlates with how we felt like our upbringing was in a way, you know? And so I don't know, when is your earliest memory of like anything Christian? Do you know?
I have memories of being at church as a young child. I have a memory
I like forgot
of
about that part of it. Yeah.
being in like vacation Bible school. I have a memory of like a woman talking to a bunch of us kids and saying that she loved Jesus so much. And she's like, you know what I do? I take my Bible and I hug it.
Whoa, dang, you remember that?
Yeah. And I was like, that's a really good, tangible way to know that God is near.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'll probably never forget that.
Right.
You know?
Oh yeah, if you remember it now. That's crazy.
I have a memory of thinking that the devil is real, watching myself in the mirror and saying, I hate Jesus, so that the devil would come into my body and then hitting my chest.
Oh my God.
Did I ever?
Yeah,
I think I
shared
already
that on
shared
here.
that story. Yeah, like
Really bizarre.
but that, like, to me, that I was young. I don't know.
Well, you're
8
let's
or, like,
think you're
7.
in that alpha state where like reality is just as real to you as, or I mean, imagination, sorry, is just as real to you as like actual reality.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense to an 8-year-old.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, all this stuff, learning about the way our brains develop from the time we're born until the time we're considered an adult is really interesting. And I feel like it highlights perfectly this indoctrination process. Another thing I was learning about is that the way that kids develop their own sense of self is largely through how they perceive their parents to see them. So it's like, kids don't understand like who they are, what their identity is, or anything like that. If they're good, if they're bad, they don't have like the rational and critical thinking skills to make those judgments for themselves. And so since their parents in general are the most trustworthy figures in their lives, they look to their parents to determine their own identity. So it's like the way the parents see the kids is the way that the kid learns to see themselves.
So if your parents see you as broken and sinful, then you're going to see yourself that way.
Yeah. Anything that parents think about their kids at those ages directly influences the way the kids view themselves at that time. But also, since they're in these like lower brain waves, those messages go deep and they affect them for a lot longer than just their childhood. Mm-hmm. And so that's why kids who their parents told them, like, you're so shy, you're shy all the time, that shyness will like now carry on through the rest of their life, because it's not like just an opinion of someone. No, it's like that is getting programmed deep into them. Mm. Yeah.
And so like, I feel like it extends so far beyond religion, but that religion has a lot of like really damning effects on a child. But like any kind of thing that you say to a child and define them as, like, it's scary. They hold that their entire life. Yeah. Unless you're like teaching them to somehow process and like weed out things. But like a child's not looking for that.
Right.
They're just like absorbing everything that they're hearing.
Well, they like literally don't have the mental capacity to do that. Mm-hmm. You know, so everything just goes straight in and is accepted as truth and forms a way that a child views the world and views himself and views everything. So yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think most parents would probably understand that responsibility. And I feel like it's kind of common sense. Like, yeah, your kids learn everything from you. But reading about the science behind it makes it seem even more weighty.
Dire.
Yeah, like, dang, those kids are such little sponges. Like, you've got to be so careful about what you say to them and how you act to them and what you teach them. Mm-hmm. Because that stuff is not easily unlearned, and it can have like a 70-year effect on this child's life. It's crazy.
Okay, so along that same lines, I wanted to bring up something that I found when I was looking through the book Leaving the Fold again. I found a lot. She has a lot in there about like you growing up as a child in fundamentalism and just like kind of how that affects you and stuff. So she says, convincing a child he or she is bad does untold harm to basic self-esteem. And so that's basically what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
The promises of fundamentalism and many other faiths appeal directly to the primitive security fears of a child. If you became religious as a child, you might remember the comfort of an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful God taking care of you. He was your heavenly Father and Santa Claus, both giving you all things and loving you forever. On the other hand, the image of hellfire may have filled your child's mind with terror. In a child's way of thinking, it makes sense for the world to be black and white, for there to be a war between good and evil, and for behavior to deserve reward or punishment. If you receive this kind of training early on, your resulting assumptions about reality may continue to affect you. Very small children are especially vulnerable to this and can incur long-term damage to their feeling and thought patterns. Because these early experiences are so embedded in their subconscious, you may have troubling thoughts or nightmares even now that you are out. Your inner child may still be scared. Mm. So it's basically just what we were talking about. I think that once we realized how deeply embedded a lot of these things were, we started realizing thought patterns that we have that we maybe thought were like just true in our life. Mm-hmm. Like just as we thought that God is real, that hell is real, that the devil is real, that there's a battle between good and evil, there's spirits, you know, in the air just around us that are like fighting for our souls. Yeah. Just as we kind of accepted that as real, we also accepted a lot of other things about our self-esteem and ourself, you know, that we're like unworthy without Jesus. We're sinful. We're born broken, and or maybe like I think like I learned a lot that I'm an outcast as a Christian person. I like am not like the world, so I'm not like cool. I don't fit in. I'm not part of the group. I'm set apart. And I did feel like an outsider a lot of my life. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that really affected my self-esteem. I felt like I couldn't be friends with just anyone. Right. You know, or I wouldn't allow myself to be, in a sense. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even more than that, think about how a child learns, like, if you're disobedient, like, you should feel ashamed of yourself. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you do something wrong, you deserve to be punished and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's like all of the stuff, all of the negative thought patterns that come as a result of following Christianity. For me, at least, it seems like most of that stuff was embedded like right away.
And when you learn them now, you're like, wait, I didn't have to believe that. Some of the things I read in Leaving the Fold that, your child should think that when they make a mistake, it's not because you're broken. It's just a natural part of being a human. And I was like, you can teach a child that?
Right. Like, that's an option? I didn't know.
Oh my gosh.
Right,
you almost get to a point where you're like, I want to have children so that I can right all my wrongs. I feel like
we talk about that a lot.
Parents are probably think that way a lot. And I feel like that's a terrible reason to have a child.
Yeah.
But, you kind of want to like care for your child. And you know what? You can. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of this podcast.
I wonder if parents are listening to the podcast right now and they're like, you guys, this is like so obvious. We know all this stuff. Probably. We don't know this stuff. We don't have kids.
We just think it's interesting.
We think it's super interesting. Yeah.
When we were researching for this episode today, I came across a verse that I think we've mentioned before in the podcast, but it fits so well into what we were talking about today. And it's from Proverbs 22:6. It says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Yeah. And that's like true. Now, I'm like, oh yeah, that verse, that's right. Like medically, like scientifically, yes, that's probably true.
I can't help but feel that they were talking about just the fact that you can brainwash your child.
Yeah.
And that if you get them young, they won't like leave the faith as an adult.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were leaving, I thought about this verse a lot because I kind of felt like, wow, where did this go wrong for me? Like, did my parents not train me up in the right way or something? Or why did this verse not apply to me?
Like, how did we get out? Yeah. We talk about that often. I don't really know what the answer is, like what aspects of our personality allowed us to question and get out. And we talk about that with you guys too, as we message on our Facebook group and Instagram and stuff. It's really interesting because I think, another piece of what doing research into this area has made me realize is that I need to not be hard on myself when I feel like my recovery from this stuff is difficult or taking a long time, or if I feel like, oh, I'm so behind in the world. Of course I'm behind, like we were absolutely indoctrinated into this way of thinking and into these beliefs. And we were given a ton of messages as we were really young about the way the world worked and about who we were. And so like, of course we're having a hard time undoing that stuff now. Because not only were we believing it for 20 years, we were given it originally when we were 6 years old. And, that stuff is like deeply rooted in our minds. It's not just like an opinion about something. It's like, no, this is the way my brain works is shaped by these messages I received when I was so young. So yeah, if you guys find yourself feeling frustrated with how long your recovery is taking, or if you feel like, man, this is so difficult, I am so upset with how hard this is, give yourself some slack because you were probably given these messages when you were really vulnerable and it's going to be hard to get them out. So another thing I was thinking about is that of course, parents want to teach their kids what they believe. And I think this kind of goes into something else we were talking about earlier today, and that's that I can't really hold it against my parents for indoctrinating me. Because, of course, like, they raised me as a Christian out of love. Like, to them, they were saving me from hell. They're like saving their precious child from hell and condemnation and all of that stuff. And so everything they did, everything they taught me was done out of love because they cared about me. Mm-hmm. The fact that they taught me about Jesus when I was super tiny, like as young as I could understand it, is just a sign that they really cared about me and they really wanted the best for me. And on top of that, they were also indoctrinated when they were a child. Mm-hmm. And so it's not something I feel like I can hold against my family in any way. How do you feel?
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. We were talking about this morning, and I agree that you can't really hold your family accountable for that because, of course, they were indoctrinated and they're doing their best. But like, it's like right now, I just like a thought popped into my head that I wish they would know, like that you need to give your children other options, mm-hmm. Like that you can't say that, hey, this is the answer.
Yeah.
And I know that,
right.
and it's like really, that's really crappy of me because of course, like you're going to indoctrinate your child with something or like teach them something that you don't mean to.
Well, but I
teach
feel
them.
like, I think that it's fine to teach your kids at a young age and even fine to maybe teach them about religion at a young age. But to me, it feels like it's immoral or even like abuse to teach a child that your religious beliefs have the same validity and the same level of certainty as like the fact that electricity travels through metal better than plastic or any other scientific fact, you know, because I mean, for me, I was taught like, yeah, the way that gravity works, that's a fact. We understand that. I was also taught Jesus is the Son of God and he's the only way to get into heaven. That's also a fact. You know, that's how it was presented to me. Both of those things equally factual, with like no distinction between one over the other in terms of like eternal weightiness, you know? And I feel like that's wrong.
So you're saying you blame your parents now?
No, I don't blame them because how could they have thought any differently? You know,
I think
it's like, I know that I can't hold it against them because a Christian, in order to be a Christian, I think you kind of have to believe that Jesus is the Son of God with the same certainty that you believe gravity exists. You know, that's like a mark of the faith, I guess. But I feel like I wish they could have explained it in a way like, well, yeah, right now, this is what I believe. This is the religion I've chosen to believe. And it's based on faith. It's not based on fact, like how science is. We can't really test it, but I have a faith that this is how things work. And when you're older, you'll be able to look at the different religions and choose for yourself what you want to believe. But for right now, this is what I believe. That's seems like a much healthier message that would allow your child to eventually think for themselves about it, as opposed to just like, hey, you're 6 years old. Jesus is the Son of God. If you don't put your faith in him, then you're going to go to a bad place. And this scary guy called the devil is going to get you. You know, that sucks.
I think that opposite way, the first way you just said, is very healthy. And I think a lot of parents are like that with their religion. And I think that just for us growing up in fundamentalism or just like whatever strict Lutheranism, that was not the case.
Right.
And I think like not the case for a lot of people listening. And I think that the thing is, I want to be able to forgive my parents because they were also indoctrinated and they believed that they were doing the best. But like to know that that wasn't right for me as a child, like that wasn't a healthy place for me to develop my mindset. And it's hard because I think like a big part of you leaving the faith and you processing everything that happened to you is going through anger. And I feel like that's completely normal. I think it's even a stage, and like I think it's like laid out as a stage of religious recovery that you're going to be angry. And I think that for me, I come back to this feeling angry that I was brought up the way I was brought up. And that is not all like because of religion, encompassing religion. There are other things that affected me that like my parents and how they raised me that I felt were deeply embedded into my brain and gave me the self-esteem I have today.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel a lot of anger towards it, but I think that for me, I need to like just obviously I'm at a point where I need to like release that and like forgive my parents. It's not their fault, and they were no way trying to be malicious to me.
Right.
And I feel like that's a good thing to remember if you do have a lot of anger towards your parents. They're not trying to be malicious to you, and you're an adult now.
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
I guess
not
they
necessarily.
might be, but yeah.
But you're an adult now, and what's really cool is you actually have like an inner wisdom, and you can help yourself. You can help yourself grow out of it.
Yeah.
But first, I really wanted you to read that section from
there's
the Freedom book.
What we're talking about kind of goes along perfectly with this book called Freedom by Osho. It has a tiny paragraph about raising kids, and it says, "Our whole way of bringing up children is to make them slaves of political ideologies, social ideologies, religious ideologies. We don't give them a chance to think on their own, to search on their own. We force their minds into a certain mold. We stuff their minds with things that even we are not experienced in. Parents teach their children that there is a God, and they know nothing of God. They tell their children that there is heaven and there is hell, and they know nothing of heaven and hell. You are just teaching your children things you don't know yourself. You are conditioning their minds because your minds were conditioned by your parents. This is the way the disease goes on from one generation to another generation." I remember reading that the first time, and we were like, oh my God, yeah. Exactly. That's exactly the cycle that's happening here. And I feel fortunate now that we like have kind of come out of this and woken up from this in a sense that I can look back on my childhood and kind of understand, oh, that's where a lot of these beliefs came from. So it's super frustrating having all this stuff to work through now when I'm 28, and I resent the fact that I feel like I'm getting a late start to life in some ways and trying to grow out of like childhood thought patterns. But on the other hand, it feels so good to kind of understand where some of this stuff is coming from, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think that it sucks to be in a place where you just kind of feel like crap, but you don't know why. Yeah,
that's the worst. That was when we were leaving Christianity. That was the worst part, was like the first 2 years when we didn't talk about it a lot and we just felt like garbage, didn't understand the world, like didn't know what to think, and also didn't know why. Yeah, that's right. You're right.
I think at this stage, it's anger aside and whatever. I think we watched something last night. Oh, God.
There's like a dogfight outside right now.
We watched something last night that says, like, everybody has, like, a story. Everybody has a past. Everybody has something that they're not, like, entirely happy about. But, like, so what? Yeah. So what are you going to do about it now? And that really, like, should I say convicts me? Like, I mean, it really, like, everybody has something, like, and people have way worse than us.
And everyone's parents mess them up somehow.
Everyone's parents
like, regardless of religion or not, your parents aren't going to do the perfect job of raising you.
And if we have kids, we're going to probably mess our kids up in some ways.
Of course.
But I think, like, the best thing that you can do for your child is to not tell them that, like, they need some outside source for guidance and they shouldn't trust their inner wisdom. Because I think that everybody needs to learn how to grow up and help themselves.
Yeah, right. What do you think are some of the childhood messages that you received that you've had to like try to unlearn now?
I think that I received messages of me being shy, of me being scared, of me being just not, I don't know how to describe it, because it's not that I'm not cool, but it's like I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy of being with the kids who are maybe like thriving in life, because I'm separate from them, because I have a different cross to bear, like Jesus, like, you know, literally. I'm set apart, but with that comes like in a way suffering and being like different from other people, you know, like I felt that I got that super heavily, that I was like, I don't know, that I'm not cool enough, good enough, like able to be friends with other people. I'm not like confident enough, you know, like, so I don't know. I felt that was deeply ingrained in me.
And so that was like probably
right now.
Partially religion, but also partially just maybe your parents' personalities that were like a mirror to you when you were little.
Yeah.
I feel like one for me was, obedience is like, was my highest calling.
Yeah.
You know, my parents, I got raised based on this like kid raising program called Growing Kids God's Way. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. If you have, like, you should message us. Like, it sounds so insane.
That's just like literal indoctrination.
Growing Kids God's Way. Yeah, right. But for me, like when I was obedient, I was a really good boy. And when I was disobedient, that was like so shameful. I remember feeling like if I would do something wrong, I felt so much worse that I disappointed my parents than I felt bad about getting spanked or whatever the punishment was, you know? So that was something I think that could potentially have morphed into me, like having way too much respect for authority and like wanting to follow the rules all the time and like kind of always looking elsewhere for approval, looking elsewhere for, like teaching and wisdom and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that stuff goes deep.
Yeah. If I was ever like emotional as a child, I was like made fun of a lot.
Yeah.
Right. By my siblings. And I was like, my parents were really disappointed in me. And like, they called me Katie Kaboom. And like, that's like a joke. And it was a joke to them. But like, I feel like I got super like affected by it.
You remember that stuff, you know?
Like I felt that I couldn't have emotions.
Yeah.
And I felt when I have emotions, I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a drag. I'm not allowed to, it's not good for everyone else.
Right.
You know, all that kind of thing.
No, I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
Like that message, like if you don't have a smile on your face, then like you need to change your attitude.
I mean, that's
like
a really
that.
Christian thing as well. You know, like, is Jesus really working in your life if you're depressed?
Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff, which is just terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like through all this process, we kind of came across something about inner child work.
Yeah.
And how you have an inner child and you also have an adult. And like, I think this is a metaphor, but it helps. It describes like how you have a core part of you that is very childlike and you have another part of you that is more discerning and adult-like. And I mean, if you think about it, you have moments where you kind of drift into, in a way, like an emotional state that feels like it brings you back to a childlike place, like something that you remember from your childhood. And you have an adult rational mind that can look at your emotions and thoughts and think, now, why am I having that? And should I be having this strongly right now? And like, is this helpful? Or what can I do to soothe you? Yeah. And I think like once we started noticing those two parts of our brain and our body and like how they're kind of like reacting to each other, it was really useful to kind of combat some of the emotions we were struggling with. Yeah. You know?
Well, and really validating too, because I know a lot of you listening have told us that you've come out of Christianity feeling like a little kid in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And we
totally
experienced that so much. Like felt like a little kid lost in the world and like kind of having to figure everything out on their own. Yeah. I remember the first time we read about this inner child work, or the concept of an inner child period, we were like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like I feel really validated. All these feelings I've been having now are making a lot more sense, and it's going to be okay, basically. So yeah, the idea of inner child work, I guess I would explain it like you're kind of attending to those subconscious parts of yourself that you feel like still have like the mindset of a child.
And the book Leaving the Fold talks about it a lot.
Yeah, it has a little bit. And it's not, I don't think it's even just for religious recovery. I think it's like a secular therapeutic technique.
It's what started for childhood trauma, just plain and simple. Yes. Yeah, but I think like
this is officially childhood trauma. I just want to go on the record and say, if you believed in hell when you're under 10 years old and thought that you'd go there if you didn't follow Jesus, then that's traumatic. That's trauma. And you're allowed to call it that. And you're allowed to feel that. And it's okay. It's okay that you have that to work through. But
this isn't like, it's not just a part of like this one book. Like a lot of people talk about it. Joe just signed up with a coach and he's going to work on his inner child with that guy. Yeah. It's like a really common technique. I guess we'd never heard about it before a few years ago. But, if you've ever tried, I don't know if you read that book, Leaving the Fold, but she has exercises to do in it. And it's basically you put yourself into a different state of mind.
It's like a visualization or a meditation, just like anything else.
Get yourself in theta or alpha. And, you kind of can visualize yourself as a child. You can hug yourself as a child. You can play with yourself as a child. It's sort of like a practice in like letting yourself go to your younger self, which sounds kind of crazy, but it can actually be really powerful if you've never done that before. The first time I envisioned myself as a child, when I was just sitting, I was relaxing, and then I envisioned myself as a child, I just started crying. I didn't even do anything. I just saw myself as a child and started crying.
So practically, what did you do first time?
The first time I think we like put on like some spa music we just found on Apple Music. Just some calming music you would play in a spa. You like get it as quiet as you can. And I just I either laid down on the floor or sat on the couch and closed my eyes. And I like took a bunch of deep breaths to relax. And then I just started,
that alpha state.
I envisioned myself walking in a field outside, and I came up to myself playing by a tree.
So you were walking in the field, you're walking as your adult, and
as you my saw adult self.
Your child self. Sitting there.
Yeah. It's super emotional. I think when it's emotional for you, I don't know what that means. Like it could mean that you maybe have forgotten yourself as a child, or you have, I don't know what it is. I'm sure, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's super powerful for me. I think that if you have things from your past that you remember as traumatic, I think that unless it's like super traumatic and you don't want to revisit them, but it could be good to go back and just hold yourself. Yeah. I think that's one of the common things. You just sit and you hold yourself on your lap.
Yeah. Literally just imagine it.
they're really there. Like, she's really there with you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to share, I had a really powerful, like, time with this, and it sort of morphed into this, and I came up with this kind of situation on my own. But I was thinking about, like, 2 separate times in my past life when I didn't feel, like I was talking about before, I didn't feel, like, cool, or I felt, like, a little bit, like, shunned.
Yeah.
You know, like that stereotypical, like, the movies in the 90s, like that unpopular girl.
Like where you're in the cafeteria looking for a place to sit.
And nobody
like, all
says
the
hi to
tables are
you.
full,
Everyone's like, don't come sit by me. Well, I feel like that kind of attitude really drowned me throughout my whole adolescent life. I felt that way as a person, and it's like affecting me now. So I thought, like, what if I had done inner child work a couple times. I thought, what if I go and get into this meditative state? I laid on the floor at night and the lights were really low and I had nice calming music on. And I envisioned myself as an adult, I basically put myself into the situation where those 2 situations where I was as, like, I don't know how old I was, like a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. I went into that situation with myself. Like, if you read Harry Potter, like, I went into the Pensieve and I went back into the memory of my past. But it's
exactly like that.
Yes, except that no one could see me except my child self. Yeah. So this is getting, like, really weird, but I went back into those memories and I sat with my child self and I, like, reassured her. And I was like, it doesn't matter, like, none of this matters. Like, this is just, like, kind of how you're perceiving this as a child. Like, you don't need to be cool right now. And like, all you need is me. I'm here. I'm going to be, like, your best friend. I love you so much. Let's go do this together. And I took myself and I'm basically, like, had, like, a day where I, like, painted her nails and I dressed her up and I made her feel special. And I told her that, like, she's, like, basically cool in my eyes, you know? And like, I made her feel confident just because, like, I was like, I'm your future self. Like, you can trust me. Like, and it feels different than someone else telling you, like, when someone else kind of tells you a compliment, you don't really believe them. Sometimes that's how I feel.
Especially for you, yeah.
Yeah. But like, it was really powerful coming from my older self, my adult self. And I went back into another memory and I, like, kind of walked with myself so that I wouldn't be nervous and made her feel better and kind of made her think, like, I talked to her about my mom and what my mom had said about things and, like, yeah, like, mom, she doesn't really know what you need, but I know what you need and this is what you need. And, and it was really,
it's so powerful.
Yeah. I was thinking about it the other day. Those memories I have are no longer, like, sad when I think back on them. Like, they're not.
You kind of, like,
I changed my past.
Yeah.
I, like, changed my past memories by inserting my adult, like, perceiving self back into them.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And now cause sometimes I think back at memories and I think, oh, I was so pathetic. Or, like, I was so shy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I, like, why didn't I, like, try harder or something like that, you know? But now those 2 memories, they just feel like memories now.
That's so cool.
Like, just a simple memory.
Yeah. You kind of, like, took the charge out of them.
Yeah.
That's
but
amazing.
I had no idea that was going to happen.
Right.
But all that to say, I think inner child work is super important.
Yeah,
I feel like
I can talk about my first experience too. I had a similar experience when we read about this. I thought, well, like, I'll give it a try, I guess. Sounds super weird.
It sounds super weird.
It sounds so weird. Yeah. And I think what I did was same as you, probably the same night, which just closed my eyes, took some deep breaths, got into kind of like a meditative space, and then imagined myself walking into a meadow, and I just saw myself sitting there on the ground, like, playing with some rocks and sticks.
Why did we both imagine a meadow?
I think that
did it tell us
book
to?
Tells you to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Now that I was saying it, I was like, wait, do we have the same visualization? But yeah, I went up and sat down and just, like, held myself in my lap and hugged myself.
Oh,
and
you're playing
kissed
with rocks
my own
and sticks?
head and was like, I love you so much.
Oh.
I care about you so much because and it was so powerful. It made me cry. It's making me tear up now thinking about it, because I think a lot of my, like, anger and resentment about the past is less about how it's affecting me now and more about how I feel so bad for the younger version of myself that he had to, like, wrestle with that stuff, wrestle with hell and eternity and sin and judgment and shame. as a kid. And I just like the act of going in my mind and hugging and just loving that young version of myself was so powerful. And like, it felt so good. It's the first time I'd ever done that. First time I'd ever really thought about my younger self, at least in that way. And it was amazing. It made me feel like my adult self is now a little bit more whole because I did that. And another way I've done it since then, and this isn't actually a practice we've done regularly, and I feel like it would be really, really good to do this like every day for a month or something. But another way I did it, which was equally powerful, was I got in the same state with kind of calm music and meditative posture and closed my eyes and stuff, and went back in my memory through different points in my life, like different potent memories in my life, kind of like what you were saying. But I like started from when I was really little, and I imagined myself at a snowmobile race it was in the summer, a grass drag snowmobile race. And I remember that something happened and I like couldn't race. And I was so sad and like so mad. And I felt like my dad wasn't helping me. So in my mind, I went back to that memory and I like knelt down in front of my little self and grabbed myself in the face and said like, hey, listen, like, I know you're frustrated right now. I know it feels like dad's not helping you, but like, it's okay. You're going to have a lot of wonderful experiences in your life. And like, this doesn't say anything about you. It's just something that happened. And like, no matter what you feel, I have you and I trust you. I mean, and you can trust me and I love you. And no matter what, I'm going to take care of you.
That's the same. That's like the same thing.
It is.
Yeah.
So I did that.
Powerful.
I gave him a squeeze and then I went on to the next memory when I was a little bit older, and then the next memory when I was a little older. And then up until when I was 17 and I was in my room and praying and like fasted and crying because I was praying to God and I felt like God wasn't doing anything for me. And in my mind, in this visualization, I went into my bedroom to my 17-year-old self and sat down next to me and put my arm around me. And I said, I am so proud of how devoted you are and how much you care about this and how you're giving yourself wholeheartedly to this thing. I just want you to know that even though God isn't answering you, I love you so much, and that in a few years, you're going to have a totally different understanding of this and everything's going to be amazing.
Dang.
I know.
We're crying so much right now.
I know. It's really powerful because it's almost like you can go back into the trauma of your past and you can give yourself in those times exactly what you needed, but you didn't receive.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that, you know, we like physically went through those past experiences, the memories that I'm talking about. I like at one point in my life, I actually lived through that. But like now, sitting here right now, recording this podcast, the past it's only a memory, you know, like there's nothing more to it. It's only a memory. And so me making a conscious effort to go back into my memories and kind of remedy the situation is almost like I'm physically going into my past and changing something about my past, which is affecting my life now. Because doing that inner child work and going and kind of like giving myself what myself needed in the past, like emotionally changed me now in the present. I feel more at ease with myself. I feel like I was able to let those bad memories go. I'm able to see them now in a way where they don't permanently affect the way I view the world or view myself. I can just think of them as like, oh, it was a memory. It was just something that happened and I thought it meant one thing, but now I know it's just something that happened. It doesn't have to be so significant.
I think that is something that's helped us so much, is realizing that our past memories are just, you know, memories, and we maybe don't even remember them accurately, and we're using them to inform who we are right now. And we kind of use them and say, like, because of this moment, that makes me this person. And one of the biggest things that we've like become aware of is that memory, like your memory should not be that significant. You should not hold that so high in just in like determining your life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Memories are important. I mean, I don't want to, like, your life is important, but like, you don't have to define yourself in these negative ways by these events that happened in your past. Like, you can move forward. And I mean, and a real tangible way that you can do this is going back to these memories, like we've said, and work on your inner child. I think a lot of us, as, you know, religious, trauma, like, what am I trying to say?
Deconverters.
Like, whatever the path we're on now, like coming out of religion, we've learned that it's okay to trust yourself. And that is so true. It rings so true when we talk about this stuff, because you know, you are able to self-soothe so well, and you can help yourself better than anyone else can.
Yeah.
I think about this sometimes. Like last night we talked about it. We're married and we know each other so well, but the person who knows me best is me. And
Yeah.
and if Joey can't give me something that I need, that's not his fault. It's down to me.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I need, and I am in charge of giving that to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that just goes along with, you know what you need as a child. It wasn't your parents' fault. They didn't know what you needed. So now, if you've had like really traumatic like experiences from your past or bad memories that are informing what you feel now, try going back and giving yourself some love. You know,
Yeah.
you have the capability to soothe yourself.
Right.
And that's something that like a lot of the books we've been reading about, you know, recovering from religious trauma talk about. And it's just something that we've been reading about, just like in things like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, or
yeah, it's like
kinds
the
of
most
books.
powerful life skill, you know, and I think we mentioned it before, but all of those years you spent praying, if you believe, like we believe, that there is no God that's listening to your prayers like that, then all of those years you were self-soothing. You know, you're praying to God, but really you're praying to yourself, and just the act of you expressing how you're feeling and comforting yourself and all of that, it's you, you know? And so when I first heard that concept, it really encouraged me, and it gave me a lot of motivation to do stuff like this inner child work, because it's really, really powerful. If you haven't tried it already, I would recommend just do it one time, you know, commit to trying it one time, set a timer for 10 minutes and put on some headphones and close your eyes and just go back to a memory that you felt like you were neglected or you were wronged or that left a lasting impression, and be that person to your younger self that wasn't there at the time. And see what you think.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
I think bottom line is that it's like, if you grew up in a religious home, it's very likely that you were indoctrinated. If you grew up with any kind of parents, it's very likely that you were indoctrinated with some kind of belief that's not serving you now. And that can happen to you if you didn't grow up in religion. So like now, like examining maybe some parts of your life that you feel like aren't working or serving you, you can see like maybe where that happened and what stage in your life you learned that. And just knowing that and being aware of it is like freedom.
Right. It's total freedom. It's what we said before, claiming responsibility for your own life, for your own recovery. That's freedom. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap things up for this episode then. If you guys are doing inner child work, or if you're interested in it, let us know. Write a comment on our Facebook page, or shoot us a message on Instagram or whatever. We love this stuff and we love talking about it, and would be super interested to hear how it's helped you in your recovery.